Welcome to Solo Marvel Champion if you're new here, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today's video is 7 tips for new players to Marvel Champions. And while this video is meant for people who just got this game over the holidays, whether receiving it as a gift or buying it for themselves, I do think they're good general tips that veteran players of the game can use as well. So let's start out at number 1. Number 1 is read the cards. This is a card game, and the words on the cards tell you how they work, right? Well, I can tell you from experience that I am pretty bad at not reading the cards, and this has led to all kinds of mistakes. If you read the cards thoroughly, you can avoid 90% of the mistakes you're going to make, I feel. Very early in my Marvel Champions gameplay, I was playing Captain Marvel, and I had 3 copies of Helicarrier on the table, and I had both copies of Energy Channel out. Well, had I read the cards thoroughly and paid attention, they both say max 1 per player. So that is a mistake that could have been avoided simply by thoroughly reading the cards. And this doesn't just apply to player cards, it applies to the encounter cards as well. Thoroughly read a card, and then questions you might have about the card are generally answered right on the card. I know I still see questions about Shadow of the Past on Facebook, but the card literally tells you what to do with Shadow of the Past, so just read the cards. I also have a game on my channel where I completely missed a forced response on a main scheme. It was a Taskmaster game. I was playing Spectrum versus Taskmaster. There is a forced something. I don't know if it's an interrupt or response on the main scheme. I missed it the entire game. Never once did it. So read the cards. That will eliminate some mistakes. And while we're talking about mistakes, number 2 is don't worry about making mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. Best thing about making mistakes in this game is it's not a competitive game. No one's going to call judge and make you take your play back because you made a mistake. Now, you want to avoid mistakes as much as you can. I feel bad about making mistakes when I win a game, and I'm really hard on myself about this with my channel. I hate having mistakes in videos. And also, the only reason I even know I made those mistakes was because I watched the game back during editing. So try to avoid making mistakes, but if you do make some, don't worry about it. The world doesn't come to an end because you made a mistake in a card game. Number 3 is don't worry about losing either. Just like making a mistake in a game isn't going to end the world, losing a game of Marvel Champions is not going to end the world. So don't worry about it. You are more than likely going to lose your first games against Rhino and Claw and Ultron. It's going to happen. And that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. Shuffle up, reset, and play it again. And eventually you'll find the ways to beat those villains. Especially if you're playing true solo, like Rhino is really swingy. You can go from no threat on the main to losing because he got an extra scheme activation. Again, don't worry about it. The world's not over. Reshuffle and play again. You'll eventually learn how to beat those villains, and then you'll just laugh at yourself for having such a hard time with them in the past. Tip number 4. Take a little extra time on your turn to examine the board state before you jump into action. Now, playing true solo, this doesn't really matter because you're only playing against the deck. You don't have anyone else in the room. When you're playing co-op, be considerate of the other players. Don't take 20 minutes on your turn, but take enough time that you can make the proper decisions. There is a difference between a mistake and a blunder. A mistake is what happens when you do something that you're not allowed to do in the game. In a recent Magneto game, I had 2 minions that were elite, and I played Wrapped in Metal on them. Wrapped in Metal says, attach this to a non-elite minion. That was a mistake. I did it, and it was wrong. The rules did not allow me to do that. However, a blunder is when you just don't play efficiently or don't make the right play. in a recent Hulk game, I could have had a 3-turn win, but I was determined to play Suborbital Leap for some reason because I didn't want the main scheme to scheme out. But if I'd just spent a little more time thinking about it, I would have won on that turn. So that's the difference between a mistake and a blunder. Mistake, the rules say you can't do it. Blunder, you just do it wrong. You're not paying attention. You're not taking the time to examine the board state. So that's tip number 4. Take a little more time on your turn. Number 5 is play expert as soon as you're comfortable doing so, and maybe even before you're comfortable doing so. I took a really long time with this game before I decided to play expert, and I have really come to like expert now. When you beat Rhino, Claw, or Ultron on expert for the first time, it is super duper satisfying. Expert really changes 3 things. The first thing is you're adding 3 more encounter cards to the deck that are pretty punishing. Next, you are increasing the villain's hit points. The biggest difference, though, for the most part, is when revealed effects on your Stage 2 and Stage 3 villain. So just taking Rhino as an example, Stage 1, he doesn't have a when revealed effect, but when you reveal Stage 2, you get an additional side scheme. So if you're playing on Expert, you start at Stage 2, which means you're also starting with an additional side scheme. Then when you get through those hit points and get to Stage 3, he also has a when revealed effect, which you would never even see playing Standard, and that is every hero gets stunned and he has toughness, which basically is when revealed he gets a tough status. So the biggest difference in playing Standard and Expert, as far as I'm concerned, is those when revealed effects on villains. So it does make the game more challenging, and for me, that makes it more exciting and a much more satisfying win. So tip number 5, go to Expert a little bit earlier than you think you're ready to. I think in the long run, you're going to appreciate Expert more than Standard. My number 6 tip is something that is going to be controversial. I think I'll get comments on this video with people telling me I should not be giving this as a tip. But number 6 for me is don't be afraid to go over 40 cards when you're building a deck. Now, it is statistically and mathematically more efficient when you only have 40 cards in your deck, but the math doesn't change too much after 40. I have several decks that are 41 or 42 cards. I've got some that are up to 44 and 45 cards, and you still win the game with them. Yes, they are marginally less efficient than they would be if they were at 40 cards, but then I would not have some of the cards in the deck that I feel I needed to win some of those games. So when you post a deck on MarvelCDB, and someone in your comments says, hey, you should think about cutting X, Y, and Z cards to get back down to 40, listen to what they have to say. Maybe it would make the deck better, but you don't have to do that. The deck building guide for this game is 40 to 50 cards. I've seen 50 card decks work just fine. In fact, a lot of times when I'm playing Ultron, I'll run 50 cards just because he eats a lot of your cards by turning them into drones. Again, 40 cards is going to be slightly more efficient, but never be afraid to go over 40 cards when you're building a deck. The math just doesn't change significantly enough to matter. All right, coming to the end here, number 7, find and get used to MarvelCDB. MarvelCDB is a great website for building decks, but you don't have to use it to build decks. I know a lot of people still enjoy just looking through their cards and picking cards out for their deck, and you can totally do that. Some of the biggest advantages of MarvelCDB, though, are the ability to filter cards. You can filter cards by your collection, number 1, but then there are built-in filters, so you can pull out traits you're looking for, or pull out cards with a certain cost that you're looking for. So for example, K:Avenger is only going to show you cards which have the Avenger trait. X:*X-Men is going to show you cards that have X-Men in the text of the card. So using those filters is super helpful, but the most helpful thing with MarvelCDB is the ability to look at your cost curve and your resource distribution. Sometimes the resource distribution doesn't matter, but there are certain heroes who it very much matters for. Wasp likes mental resources, so a lot of times you're looking to have more mental resources in a Wasp deck than other resource types. And MarvelCDB makes it really easy to see that visually and makes it easier to build those types of decks. So those are my 7 tips for new players. Veteran players, please leave additional tips that you think will help new players just getting into the game. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all have a marvelous day.